Welcome to Black History Decoded, where I give insight into Black or African history that has been misrepresented over the centuries. Now, this is absolutely not Cleopatra and her son Caesarion. This is what they claim, it's not the case, and I will prove it. It's actually common sense if you think about it. That's if you have a reasonable understanding of the history. Also, I'm going to let you know why I strongly believe the Cleopatra VII story is a recycled story from the so-called 18th dynasty of the ancient Egyptians, making Cleopatra, in quotation marks, indeed black. They show us these busts or these coins of Cleopatra, but apparently there were many Cleopatras throughout history, so how do I know that this is Cleopatra VII and that she reigned in ancient Egypt? Just because they say so? I know history is written by the victors, and if you tell a lie often enough, it becomes a truth. I know African or Black history has been misrepresented by the victors.
When I was growing up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history, and neither did I. That I was a savage, about whom the less said the better, who had been saved by Europe and brought to America. And of course, I believed it. I didn't have much choice. Those are the only books there were. Everyone else seemed to agree.
A white man that I've worked for, if he's alive today, he's a liberal with a capital L. His name was Gagsteiner. I asked him about some books on the African people in ancient history. And in the language of the South, he let me down slow. I mean, he spoke kindly. He said, you know, John, I'm sorry that you came from a race that has made no history. But if you persevere, if you obey laws and study hard, you make history someday.
So academics, historians, Egyptologists, etc. conspired to make it seem that Africans or Black people didn't do much of anything in history. Like, we didn't have much of a history. So are they willing to lie about history, even their own? Yes, of course they are. So I wanted to see Cleopatra VII on ancient Egyptian walls, an engraving of her, nothing with color, and I came across this, an engraving of her at the Temple of Hathor, which I find curious because Hathor is way, way, way before Cleopatra VII's time or the time of the so-called Ptolemies. They say the Temple Hathor was built by Ptolemy XII and nearly completed by Queen Cleopatra VII's time around 54 to 20 BCE. So I say around Augustus' time that it was completed. Also, there is evidence of temples and other structures that date back all the way to 2500 BCE with Hathor. Now, that's what they say because this whole BCE timeline gets on my nerves. The ancient Egyptians, the ancient Greeks, and other people during their time wrote their dates backwards. Oh, it's 3000 BCE. Next year it's gonna be 2999 BCE. Like, what? Like, doesn't make sense to me. If that's the case, I would love to see that, but historians just say it, and we're supposed to go along with it. Now, let's say that the Europeans, to put this whole like mural thing, like this whole engraving that they on the wall into perspective, let's say the Europeans came to America and they resurrected a temple of the Native Americans and worshiped their so-called deity from 2500 BCE. What? Why would they do that? But apparently the Greeks did this. It's just bizarre. They conquered the Native Americans. They're not going to immerse themselves in their culture when they have their own. This is not what conquerors do, but apparently this is what the ancient Greeks did. So they're basically saying they have no culture of their own. They have to steal other people's culture. Something is definitely fishy here. I will put it another way. Imagine Joe Biden wins a second term, and in the Capitol, they create a mural of Joe Biden being blessed by George Washington. That's why he won or whatever and stuff like that. That's why they put the mural up. It's like, this guy's been dead for like over 200 years. Like, why would they do that? It's absolutely ridiculous, right? So supposedly this is Cleopatra and Caesarion being greeted by dead gods, who were actual people, by the way, that existed over thousands upon thousands of years ago, supposedly. I mean, I don't understand this. This is absolute nonsense. We're supposed to believe this crap? So they are clearly telling a lie here by claiming that this is Cleopatra and her son Caesarion. On further investigation, I found out that this is not Cleopatra and her son Caesarion. This temple was created way before so-called Cleopatra and the Ptolemies existed. If you do your own research, you'll come across Cleopatra VII being linked with Isis, who's also known as Hathor. Isis and Hathor are apparently interchangeable. It's very strange, but they'll go back and forth with it. But ultimately, they're the same person. So just go look it up. But they say yes, and then they say no. It's just weird. But they're the same person. Now, I'm going to explain to you what this image is actually saying, but first, I noticed that the ancient Greeks have a habit of claiming something that's not theirs, or the historians are claiming the ancient Greeks did things that they didn't do. The ancient Greeks apparently admitted that they learned everything from the ancient Egyptians.
Read what the Greeks said, not what we think, but if you read what the Greeks said, they said they got everything from Egypt. They got all their knowledge from Egypt.
That alone should tell you that the ancient Egyptians were not white. Back then, if the ancient Egyptians were white or similar to them, they would have claimed it as their own, but they knew the ancient Egyptians were black, and they even said it. So, historians went on to say that, the ancient Greeks are responsible for this, they are responsible for that, blah, 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 when clearly they learned everything from the ancient Egyptians. To the point where when they conquered the ancient Egyptians, they have to adopt their culture, which is very strange because they make it seem that the ancient Greeks have their own culture. But no, when the ancient Greeks conquer the ancient Egyptians, they have to immerse themselves in the ancient Egyptian culture. It's just bizarre. So Pythagoras was not the father of mathematics. Socrates was not the father of philosophy. Aristotle was not the father of logic or political science. Apparently, Alexander the Great and his mother share a similarity with Isis and Horus, aka so-called virgin birth. Cleopatra VII being identified with the goddess Isis. What? Why? They are not the same. The Trojan War was not ancient Greek, it was ancient Egyptian. Look up General Jehuti. The baskets of tributes were on pack animals, donkey or horse. The ancient Egyptians were hiding inside the baskets. The ancient Greeks got the information from the ancient Egyptians and misinterpreted it, making a huge wooden horse, men hiding inside of it, and the so-called Trojans dragging it into their fortress and getting screwed over. Okay, this is what happens when another people take another people's information and they interpret it the way they want. Right? The victor writes the history. They could say whatever they want about the loser, and they could rewrite their history. They could say whatever. They could say whatever. Some things they might be telling the truth. There are other things that no, we're gonna like do it this way. We're gonna do it this way. We're gonna do it that way. That's what you have to understand. The victor writes the history. They have control. They can say whatever. So if you believe everything you're told in history, you're a fool. Like, you're straight up fool if you believe everything you're told in history. And look at the Moses problem. I can give you the Moses problem. Like, Moses parted the sea, or God parted the sea. That wasn't the case. They built a boat and they went to the other side. It's as simple as that. They built a boat and they went to the other side. The person that interpreted the information misinterpreted it. He obviously misinterpreted, or she, whatever. When you have a boat, it cuts through the water, it parts the water, and then walking on dry land is people walking on the boat. So Moses, God parting the sea and the Israelites walking on dry land, was misinterpreted. But there are people out there that are going to swear that this actually happened, because it's repeated to them over and over and over and over and over again. They can't think outside the box. A lie told often enough becomes a truth. So you get indoctrinated over time, indoctrinated. And when that happens, it's very difficult to think outside the box. Now I'm going to explain this image. This image is Queen Tai and Pharaoh Amenhotep III. That woman with the sun disk and the horns on her head is Isis or Hathor, with her son Horus in the front. Note that grown-up Horus is behind her. This image is basically showing the progression of their status because of the deal Isis obtained from Amenhotep III, saying that when my child was young, I did a huge favor for you, and because I did that favor, we made a deal where you would give my son your name. It's in the mythology, which has some basis in fact.
Isis and the name of the sun god. The Egyptians were firm believers in magic. The goddess Isis was considered to be especially potent in the magical arts, and one of her greatest coups came when she persuaded Re to divulge his secret name so that she held power over him. Isis was a clever woman, explained one story, more intelligent than countless gods. She was ignorant of nothing in heaven or on earth. She wanted to place herself and her son Horus at the head of the pantheon of gods, and the only way to do this was to discover Re's secret name. One day Isis came upon Re when he was asleep, snoring loudly. From the corner of his open mouth hung a long dribble of saliva, which gathered weight and fell to the ground. Isis pounced. Scooping up the spittle, she mixed it with clay in the form of a poisonous snake. Then she breathed magic into the snake to make it come alive. Isis had noted Re's movements and knew that every so often he would leave his palace to go for a walk. Each time on his route, he passed a crossroads. Isis left her snake there and awaited further developments. Re emerged for his excursion, and as Isis had planned, the snake bit him. Re saw nothing, but he felt the poison coursing through him. In pain, he called to the 9 gods of the Ennead for help. Re had a fever and was sweating and shivering, but the other gods were helpless. They could do no more than mourn the impending loss of the sun. Isis then made a dramatic entrance. She could cure him, she said, but only if he would tell her his name. Re refused. She offered again and again, but still he declined. Eventually, his agony became so extreme that he could bear it no longer, and he agreed to give Isis the secret on condition that she should tell it to no one other than her son, Horus. Isis accepted these terms, and speaking aloud the god's true name, she removed the poison. The sun god was cured at once, and Isis and Horus attained the power that they had sought. The first reference to the Aten date from several centuries previously. It had become a major deity by the reign of Amenhotep IV's father, Amenhotep III, who himself was known as the dazzling sun disk. By the time of his son's accession, it was widely known as a symbol of the sun and, tentatively, as yet another manifestation of Re.
So obviously there's some embellishment or a misinterpretation of how actual events took place, but ultimately she did a huge favor. Like, she basically saved his life. Okay? She saved his life, and obviously Ra, who I say is Amenhotep III, he was about to die, right? Because he's an actual person. These so-called gods are actual people. So she saved his life, but in order to do so, she had to get power for her son and herself. Okay, and that's exactly what happened. So this is what this mural is showing. So Amenhotep III's other persona is Ra, and the son of Isis is none other than Amenhotep IV, better known as Akhenaten. He is also Horus, if you didn't figure that out yet. These so-called gods in ancient Egyptian history are actual people. I'm going to say that again. They're actual people. They are not supernatural beings that came down and lived amongst the humans. That is a bunch of nonsense, and I can't believe some people believe that, but I'm not surprised because the Egyptologists don't put things into perspective. It is not their culture. Africans have a tradition of wearing masks that show a different aspect of themselves. That's what Ra, Thoth, all the others that have masks, animal figure, that's what it is. It's a different aspect of themselves. Okay? Now, what I said was portrayed on the temple walls of Hathor. So now the story of Isis and Horus is not a virgin birth story. I want to make that clear. It's not a virgin birth story. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It's not a virgin birth story. This is the story of the child that was found outside the palace that was adopted into the royal family. Note that Amenhotep IV, aka Akhenaten, looks nothing like Queen T and Amenhotep III. Well, that's because he was the child that was found outside the palace and eventually became pharaoh through the cunningness of his mother, aka Isis, aka Hathor. There's evidence of this, the same occurrence, happening in another source, and that source is the Anunnaki king list. Now, there are people out there that are going to tell you that, the Anunnaki are from outer space, which is a red herring. They are not from outer space. They are the ancient Egyptians. If you study the 18th dynasty, and you have a thorough knowledge of the 18th dynasty, and you read the Anunnaki king list, you'll see that they're one in the same. They're one in the same. Once you realize that, you have to ask yourself, why did they portray them as being from outer space? Why did they do that? Well, in order to hide the history, of course. Also take note that the Anunnaki king list presents itself as their first dynasty, which is in line with the so-called 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt. This is why I have a problem with the BCE timeline. First of all, the ancient Egyptians did not write their dates backwards, and everything that we see in ancient Egypt can be done in less than 500 years. The pyramids of ancient Egypt, which is a large-scale project that was very intricate and precise, was done in about 60 years. It was done in about 60 years. These people were very fast and capable builders. Look at the US. It is not even a 300-year-old civilization, and a lot has changed. Ancient Egypt being a supposed 3,000-year-old civilization, the culture would change dramatically. Everything would change dramatically, but it seems to stay still, stuck in time. Imagine the United States 2,700 years from now, or a particular town of the United States. It would look totally different. Most likely, it wouldn't be called the United States. The culture, the people, etc. would be so different, so different, and we would most likely wouldn't talk about the United States because so much interesting things happened after that time period. If you transport somebody 2,700 years into the future, they won't know where they are. I guarantee, I'm sure of it. They won't know where they are. You understand? You put George Washington. Bring George Washington here now, in the 21st century. Where am I? He won't know where he is. It's like, no, you're in the United States. You're in the United States. Unless he has some landmark to know, but I mean, like, he won't know where he is because it's just completely changed. Huge time shift. Obviously, the culture would change, but apparently for ancient Egypt, it stands still. I find that fascinating. Now, look at the Namur palette, which is supposed to be around 3000 BCE. Take the artwork and the hieroglyphics and transport him to the time of supposed Cleopatra and Hathor temple that her father supposedly created, which obviously he didn't. Well, not much has changed. The artwork still looks pretty much the same. They should have gone beyond hieroglyphics, maybe a writing style similar to the Sumerians, but no. For a 3,000-year-old civilization, apparently the ancient Egyptians didn't do much of anything. If it was less than 500 years, okay, that is impressive. A whole bunch of history is missing from ancient Egypt for it to be a 3,000-year-old civilization. They only talk about certain pharaohs here and there. It's just scattered, but it's just here and there. It's like, I'm sure a lot of interesting things happened in 3,000 years, but only a selective amount of information that we have. It's just very bizarre. Now, getting back to Akhenaten or Amenhotep IV being in the Anunnaki king list, during the reign of the seventh king from the Anunnaki king list, which I strongly believe to be Amenhotep III, a child was found, and that child eventually became Pharaoh. That's in the Anunnaki king list. Side note, I strongly believe that this Akhenaten character is the Jesus character outside the Bible. Strongly believe that. There were problems in the land, and he definitely could not measure up to the previous king, Amenhotep III, which is the seventh king, was very awesome. Amenhotep III was very awesome. The eighth king was too much of a pacifist. He wasn't getting stuff done, and then eventually the people rebelled against him, and a prince killed him and assumed the throne. That child seemingly came out of nowhere, which is the eighth king, like or the child that in even ancient Egyptian history came out of nowhere. They found him, right? Seemingly came out of nowhere, like the so-called virgin birth. Became very popular, but then the people turned on him. That is exactly what happened to so-called Jesus. Now, there were some people that were upset about this. Some people weren't. So those people that were upset, they left and created Amarna. Even though he was dead, they adored him, just like so-called Jesus now, right? He's long dead, but people are still ranting and raving about Jesus, blah, blah, blah. Whatever you want to believe about him, they're still ranting and raving, and they're glorifying him and stuff like that. Well, the people that liked Akhenaten, they left and created Amarna, and they venerated him there. So they put his images in and around the temples of Amarna. Then a good chunk of them went into Europe, hence the Black Madonna and Child. Now, for me, the Cleopatra story sounds like a sort of recycled version of the Hatshepsut story. Did you know that Hatshepsut poisoned herself over time by using a certain cream? She also had a side piece, a lover, Sinnamut, who died before her. Also, according to the Anunnaki king list, what we know as Thutmose III was never pharaoh. He was just a very good general, just like Julius Caesar. Also, bear in mind that Roman means fake. Romantic, romanticize, romanticism, which is imaginary or fictitious. A romantic account of one's war service. A romantic ideal, meaning that you want it to be a certain way, but it's really not. Fake. Like the Roman Catholic Church. Fake Catholic Church. So when the Catholic Church had the Black Madonna and Child, that was the original Catholic Church. But when it got infiltrated by way of the Protestant Reformation, it became the Roman Catholic Church. Fake Catholic Church. During that time, a new religion was affirmed, which was Christianity, and the old religion was infiltrated by wolves in sheep's clothing. Look up cretin in a good dictionary. You will come across the Latin version Christianus. So Christian, back in the day, was not a very favorable word, but when they got into power, it became so. Just like the word Roman. Catholic, on the other hand, was a favorable word, which means unbiased, universal, broad-minded, all-encompassing, etc. Basically, wokeness. The people that took over did not like good works because they were wolves in sheep's clothing. Wokeness is also the term for socialism. And we know the world order that came in from the Protestant Reformation did not like good works, which is a form of socialism. So the Protestant Reformation was definitely a New World Order. Protest, Reformation, Renaissance, rebirth, new beginning. They said it in so many ways. It was clearly a New World Order, and they started changing things from there. That world order also despised blacks, gays, and women. Notice all those four things are rising up right now, and there's this pushback to stop it, but it will not succeed. When morality or socialism increases in the world, these negative people will lose power. Wars that threaten our existence have to be done in order to make people realize that we should respect and look out for one another. Now, remember I told you that the Anunnaki king list is eerily similar to the 18th dynasty. Well, there's this woman named Kishargal, who I believe to be Hatshepsut in the Anunnaki king list. She was wife of the fourth pharaoh Anshargal. He had a son with a minor wife, and he was the firstborn. Guess who that was? Thutmose III. Kishargal Hatshepsut contested the firstborn male rule.
In the reign of Anshargal, Kishargal, his first wife, was pronounced. A half-sister of the king she was. In Anshargal's reign, concubines were again brought into the palace. By the concubines, sons and daughters to the king were born. A son by one was the first to be born. The son of a concubine was the firstborn. Thereafter, Kishargal bore a son. The legal heir by law he was, the firstborn he was not. In the palace Kishargal raised her voice, in anger shouting, "If by rules my son, by a first wife born, from succession shall be barred, let the double seed not be neglected. Though of different mothers, of one father the king and I are offspring. I am the king's half-sister, of me the king is half-brother. By that my son the double seed of our father Anib possesses. Let henceforth the law of the seed, the law of espousal overpower. Let henceforth a son by a half-sister, whenever born, above all other sons rise to succession." Anshargal, contemplating, the law of the seed embraced with favor. Confusion of spouse and concubines, of marriage and divorce, by it would be avoided. In their council, the royal councillors the law of the seed for succession adopted. By the king's order, the scribes the decree recorded. Thus the next king by the law of the seed for succession was proclaimed. To him the royal name Anshar was granted. Fifth on the throne he was.
Kishargal indeed had a son to replace Thutmose II, so most likely she was in charge until he came of age. This puts Hatshepsut's story into perspective. She did have a son, and she wanted him to ascend to the throne, but he wasn't the firstborn. So she contested the firstborn male rule, and Thutmose II changed it. Note that they say that Thutmose III's wife is supposedly named Merytre, I can't pronounce it, but Meytre Hatshepsut. Well, what if that's not his wife, but another name for Thutmose II's wife, another name for Hatshepsut, and their son is Amenhotep II, or he's the son of Senenmut. What is also fascinating in the Anunnaki king list is that the prince that killed the 8th king and assumed the throne, he does not like Kishargal, aka Hatshepsut. He proved that he was related to what I believe to be so-called Thutmose III, who was barred from becoming pharaoh because of the law changing. If anybody would be wiping away Hatshepsut's images, it would be him.
Was Alalu? Was he a legal heir? Was he firstborn? By what right did he usurp? Was he not a king's slayer? Before the 7 who judge Alalu was summoned, his fate to consider. Before the 7 who judge, Alalu spread his pleas. Though neither legal heir nor a son firstborn, of royal seed indeed he was. Of Anshargal am I descended, before the judges he claimed. By a concubine my ancestor was to him born. Alam was his name. By the count of Shars, Alam was the firstborn, the throne to him belonged. By conniving, the queen his rights put aside. A law of the seed from naught she created, for her son the kingship obtained. Alam of kingship she deprived, to her son instead it was granted. By descent of Alam's generations am I continued. The seed of Anshargal is within me.
Do your own research. you will see that the Anunnaki king list is similar to the 18th dynasty, which makes the 18th dynasty actually the first dynasty, making ancient Egypt way less than a 3,000-year-old civilization. I'm telling you, all that we know and have been shown about ancient Egypt can be done in less than 500 years. Any civilization that has the same culture for 3,000 years and nothing much has changed is impossible. Also, what we know as Tutankhamun is in the Anunnaki king list. Did you ever wonder why there was a phallic piece that was in his tomb? Because they found a phallic piece in his tomb, and these Egyptologists cannot, for the life of them, figure out why. Well, in the Anunnaki king list, the reason is because during a fight with the prince, or the pharaoh, well, he was a prince at that time, that killed the eighth king, there was a fight for the throne. This was the second fight. So the first fight, Tutankhamun, or I think it's Anu, they call him Anu on the Anunnaki king list, he won. But then this other prince, like, he went somewhere, he went to another place, and he got some information, and then which was favorable to the kingdom, and then Anu, or Tutankhamun, went to see him, and then there was a fight again, and he lost. Not Tutankhamun, the other guy lost, and he got so upset that he bit off his penis. So Tutankhamun's penis was bitten off. That's why they put an erect phallus in his tomb. Okay, it's in the Anunnaki king list. They mention that, but yet they can't put two and two together and figure out that, hey, this is why he had an erect penis in his erect phallus in his tomb. They can't figure that out. It's ridiculous. These Egyptologists are ridiculous. It gets on my nerves.